Geekazine's special coverage of HP Discover 2011 is brought to you by Iolo System Mechanic. Go over and use the code Geekazine for up to 50% off System Mechanic 10. And Wirecast. Produce all your video straight from your computer right to the internet with Wirecast. Go over to geekazine.com and click on the link. Of course, Geekazine is a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network. Over at techpodcast.com. If it's tech, then it's here. You used to be in the movies?
No,
Oh, SE.
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm not an engineer, but I played one on TV, basically.
We got Michael Nielson here. He's with the HP. Wow,
yeah.
I'm brain dead.
Well,
here.
we are at HP Discover. I mean, with HP Networking.
Welcome to HP Discover. This is Jeffrey Powers with Geekazine and the Tech Podcast Network. And Michael, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Sorry if I caused you some technical difficulties just by my presence
That's
here.
okay. We were talking a little bit about, we were talking about the movie business about 2 seconds ago. But we're talking about HP and converged infrastructure.
Yeah.
And, from Interop, we met 3 weeks ago at Interop.
It seems like so long ago,
and we
though.
talked. I was in Vegas, and I was in New York, and I was back here.
Oh, were you?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been a
Perfect.
fun little trip. So,
Yeah.
but we talked about the HP Flex networking,
Right.
and getting campuses going. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about what that all is?
Okay, great. Thanks. So, yeah, when we launched the HP Flex Network back in, I guess it was 3 weeks ago, back in May.
It was a long time ago.
It seems like an eternity now. It's the second trade show in Vegas in 3 weeks. The major thrust around it for that launch was around the campus, like you said. And the focus within the context of the launch with Flex Campus was delivering multimedia and collaboration tools across the campus network. And the premise behind all of Flex Network is around really just about simplification of the network architecture. And I'll be honest, there's been a lot of digs. I've only been at HP now for a few months. And I spent a great amount of my career competing with HP and throwing out the digs that they're cheaper, and if you want a really cheap box, go buy a cheap box. The reality, though, when I got here, I was shocked to see some of the boxes that they actually had that they did a horrible job promoting 2 or 3 years ago, even with 3Com and H3C. But there's some platforms that are in the portfolio that are astonishing. You saw the 10500 back at Interop. We probably had the 12518 there as well. In fact, we had a few of them for the data center. So we're talking about these 11, 12 terabit platforms that are just now starting to gain a bunch of traction. And the reason for it, and the reason I mentioned the cost thing, is because we're trying to get away from this, it's about the cost of the platform, and really start to talk about it's the cost of the architecture and the problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. And if, I've been having this battle now and debate with Cisco, my former employer, quite frankly, for quite a while. And if you're going to design 4 and 5 tier network architectures, it's going to be more expensive. Yeah. I don't care if you throw cheap boxes at the problem, it's going to be more expensive. So we're trying to help get around that with this concept of agility and simplifying both the campus and the data centers. Data center, we think we can confidently get to a 1-tier network very, very quickly in most environments. In fact, DreamWorks, who's one of our customers, they've got a phenomenal deployment, and it's a completely 1-tier, 10 gig, off Virtual Connect, straight back to 2 chassis, 12x18 core. It's a 1-tier data center. And they do processing 24/7, 85% utilization with like 20,000 server cores. So this is not really a small not big, not a huge company, but a big data center especially by people standards, right? So in the data center, we're already seeing the trend towards 1-tier flattened architectures. I think that in the campus, we'll start seeing a very similar trend, especially as we get closer to, we'll start to see a 2-tier deployment first. And once people get more comfortable with the idea of the best practices around security and things of that nature. And as you know, right, and best practice for security is Wi-Fi goes through an access tier, has got to go back out and farmed for network health checks and things like that. That's because it was a forced 3 and 4 tier design. If we can help people get away from the 3 and 4 tier and up to a 2 and a 1 tier, we think we can radically change just the economics of the campus network.
And they're doing that because, to put it in the way that I'm thinking here, back at Interop, there was one of the other bloggers, Bob, was there, and he actually works for the local university. And they're going through an ultimate change, and that ultimate change goes from IT in the IT groups to IT as in the IT whole. And I remember 10 years ago, I was with local Department of Revenue for the state of Wisconsin,
Okay.
and we got into a new building, and the next gradual step was to take people like me who were just the section IT people and
Okay.
integrate them into the one as the whole IT infrastructure. The same idea applies here. Is
Yeah.
you're taking out those one to two boxes, those old machines that are 10, 15 years old, and put them into a system that farms it out. So if there is a problem, they're not going down. There's redundancy,
Yeah.
and there's failover.
Yeah, and these old 3 and 4 tier designs, they were designed for resiliency because they were constrained by capacity and performance. Once you remove those constraints, if you stick with a 3-tier architecture, you're stuck with the resiliency design that's based on a 15-year-old architecture, which is almost by definition not resilient in the first place. So things like spanning tree, I want to walk around with a T-shirt with STP and a big circle and line through it everywhere I go because I hate it's like the bane of my existence when I was in IT.
Okay.
It's the bane of everybody's existence in IT today.
Yeah.
And if we can get away from things, I'm picking on spanning tree, right? But 20-second reconvergence is evil. In a multimedia environment, in an environment specifically where I want to take my handset and do a live video chat to somebody on the other end of the country, I don't want to have a network outage that's 20 seconds long or end up in situations where the audio is disconnected from the video or get this hideous jitter to where I'm getting, you know what that looks like, obviously.
Or even worse, you're walking across this hall right here.
Yeah.
And you're watching a video. You don't want that pause and wait.
Yep.
or break, and you have to start all over again.
It may have been you at Interrupt that called it the spinning circle of doom. I'm not sure who it was, but it was hilarious.
But that sounds like a really good analogy right there. So, yeah, I guess I did say that. So how do we avoid the spinning circle of doom?
Well, it's funny, like you mentioned, right? With IT organizations used to be very siloed. Data center group was fractured into 7 different organizations. There's an app group, a server group, umpteen different organizations on a case-by-case basis. You go back, 12 years ago, you saw the same transition with transport, with optical and circuit networks and IP networks.
Yeah.
Those finally converged. A couple years later, you saw the voice guys start to pay attention to the data guys. And we're now starting to see a trend where the data center people and the server folks don't want to whack the network guy with a ruler when he walks down the hall. They're actually willing to have a conversation with each other now.
Yeah.
And part of what we're doing, I love the whack the hand with a ruler thing. Part of what we're doing with Flex Network is to help break down those barriers. So not because I want to give the network people control of the servers, but at the end of the day, the server connects to a network. There's network state information that sits inside that server that the network guys really need to see what's going on.
Yeah.
So giving a little bit more visibility for the application side within the network and the network side within the server. And now, as we do that, we'll start to wedge it slowly and give a little more control to each side of the equation until we get to a point, in probably 2 or 3 years, where those groups are working together a lot better than they are today.
So in other words, they won't say, well, I'm a server guy, I don't deal with the network, or I'm a network guy, I don't deal with the server.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not going to give credit to Sun from 15 years ago for saying this, but the network is a computer, right? And that's, at the end of the day, it's about the application that resides on the infrastructure in the first place. And I don't care what the plumbing is. I don't care what box it sits on. I don't care how many blades is in a chassis. I mean, these things matter materially to the IT team, but if it's the user experience that you're worried about, and we're doing some research right now that shows that CIOs are finally starting to get pressure for not application delivery like ADCs, but delivering an application in a way that you would expect to get it from home, which, broadband 8 years ago was not good. Broadband today, I'm getting 25 megs to my house for $40 a month,
That's true.
right? So people have the expectations have increased just in the past 24 months to a point that I didn't think was physically possible, and that in their personal lives, and now they're taking that into IT. And now the IT teams are saying, well, hang on a second. I don't want to go back and re-architect everything just to meet your needs around video. Mm-hmm. CIO is getting pressure, though, so we're going to start to see that shift happen pretty soon.
Well, yeah, and they'll have to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the wiring, for example, that we're running is 5-10 years ago was great, but nowadays it's not acceptable. I mean, we've got to go to a fiber backbone. We've got to redesign our architecture within not only within a campus, but sometimes just within a single building.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one of the examples that I think I'll give in one of these sessions while I'm here this week is how do you collapse a 10, not collapse is the wrong term, how do you take a 10-story building with switches on every possible level, with aggregation tier in the basement, and then multiple MDF and IDF tiers where necessary? How do you turn that into a logical entity? So how do you make a building a network versus making a building a series of 56 switches that are all managed independently, that have got no common QoS policies across the whole 9 yards? It's just, there are ways to do this that have actually been in existence by formerly 3Com and by HP Networking, and then combined between the two for the past 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And we're going to start turning up the heat on our competitors and saying, we got to fix these problems. Yeah. And we can't do it alone. We're the only vendor with double-digit share, but we're not number one. We can't go out and force the market to make the shift. Exactly. But we can put a whole heck of a lot of pressure on competitors and say, this is where customers are going. We got to get on the same train and go the right direction.
Well, here's another a scenario for you, and this comes from my years as a government IT official. You would have 7 floors. Like, for instance, I'll take a Department of Transportation, which was one of the places I worked.
That's right.
We had 7 floors of IT, and we're talking, the 7th floor could have been something that was funded federally. The 6th floor was something that was funded statewide. The 5th floor would have been funded locally. Now, all of these companies work as separate entities, but they have to work on the same network. So on the 7th floor, let's say you have HP Networking, but on the 6th floor, they don't have that much revenue. They don't get that much funding. So they're sitting on, we'll just say Compaq network. And then on the 5th floor, they decided to go all Cisco and go from there. So now we have a mixed architecture that needs to work efficiently together. Yeah. And there's no way you can say, okay, 5th floor, you need to go to HP, because then they're just going to say, okay, no, 7th floor, you need to go to Cisco, and then you get into a big fight right there.
Right, and that's a really big part of what we've been trying to talk about for the past few months now, and certainly with the launch that we did back at Interop. It's got to be a heterogeneous environment. Customers have to be given the option to pick best of breed for their application, and I shouldn't have to force them to buy an 11.5 terabit switch for a relatively simple campus backbone if they don't have a complicated network, or vice versa. I shouldn't force them to buy a simple 10100 switch when in reality they need gig, detail QoS, maybe MPLS down to the access point, right? So we need to allow customers to make the right choices for networks, and that's the mentality that hasn't existed in this industry in the past. Well, I've been in this for 20 years, for the past 20 years.
Well, everybody's been fighting over it, trying to be on top, and now somebody's just got to say, it's not about being on top, it's about working together.
Right, and the innovation has to happen.
Exactly.
And it has to happen within the platform, between platforms, but we have to maintain some kind of some logical adherence to standards between the layers in a domain and then between those two domains. So between a data center and a campus, I can't have non-standard protocol implementation between the two. I can't, the same thing with, there's a battle going on with MPLS right now, and we don't know where it's going to go. The TP standards there are 2 different camps, and we need to realign those because we're starting to see a push by sophisticated enterprises that they want MPLS down, not to the desktop, but a lot closer to it than they used to be, right? So it's standards like that we have to get our heads wrapped around, and as an industry we have to fix, so we're not forcing customers into an architectural decision that they can't back out of, and that's what happened 20 years ago.
Is there a good book or a good white paper that somebody can read to get a little bit more insight on this?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we've developed internally as our own point of view between our architects and a bunch of us in the organization. There's one in particular called the Flex Network Architecture White Paper, which is up on the website. Okay. There's a bunch of others as well. Gartner's done a ton of research around this, around multi-vendor network analysis. They've also done interoperability papers on how this stuff should work together, and then what the next steps of the architecture should look like. And I think most of the stuff's actually been licensed by HP, and it's been posted up to our site. And I know it's out there because you see a competitor of ours, for example, using that against everybody. Instead of saying the myth of a single vendor network, which is what Gartner says, it's the myth of a good enough network. The irony being, most of us in the industry have been calling Cisco good enough for a long time. So I'm looking forward to a shift in mentality and people acting like adults and focusing on fixing the problems for IT, because IT is going to be under we've been doing this forever, right?
Yeah.
And we've lived through this pressure for decades.
Yeah.
It's about to get a whole lot more painful for people, and we can try to head that off a little bit and make it just a little bit easier day by day.
Yeah. Make them pay now, or make them pay, or they'll end up having to pay later.
Right. It's not really, not a huge investment. There's a little bit of time and a little bit of a shift in thinking. And it's not really a big dollar thing and not really a big investment in resources or people, but there is a bit of a shift that has to be done in terms of how we want to think about campus and data center networks, and then everything as one big logical entity. Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. Michael, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
We
it.
learned a lot about the HP networks and the flexibility that you can have. So you don't have to get rid of your Cisco systems just yet. You don't have to get rid of you can gradually get into it, but the idea changing now will save you time and effort and money now than later. So more on HP Discover. We got a lot more interviews this whole week here. Stick around. My name is Jeffrey Powers with Geekazine. If you got any questions, go up on Twitter at Geekazine. Do you have a Twitter?
I have been avoiding a Twitter account for a long enough time, and I apologize for that.
Well, when we were at Interop, we got Les his Twitter. Maybe tomorrow night we will get you a Twitter handle.
I've got an account. I just went stale on it 18 months ago, and I've been holding off. But I'll go back on today. I promise.
All right. Well, once we find out his Twitter handle, we'll get you that. So this is HP Discover. Jeffrey Powers here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Geekazine's special coverage of HP Discover 2011 is brought to you by Iolo System Mechanic. Go over and use the code Geekazine for up to 50% off System Mechanic 10. And Wirecast. Produce all your video straight from your computer right to the internet with Wirecast. Go over to geekazine.com and click on the link. Of course, Geekazine is a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network. Over at techpodcast.com. If it's tech, then it's here.